An op-ed written by a Stanford University undergraduate student has sparked a discussion online about accommodations for students with disabilities. There's been concern in some academic circles that students at some of the country's most prestigious schools are taking advantage of their disability policies.
And those concerns were echoed in the op-ed written by Stanford's Elsa Johnson, who says that her school will grant single dorm rooms, extra time on tests, and even exemptions from academic requirements to students who qualify as disabled. Johnson writes, one of the most prestigious universities in the US offers perks to those who say they have ADHD, night terrors, even gluten intolerance. You'd be stupid not to game the system. But at Stanford, she goes on, almost no one talks about the system with shame. Rather, we openly discuss, strategize, and even joke about it. At a university of savvy optimizers, the feeling is that if you aren't getting accommodations, you haven't tried hard enough.
This follows a report from The Atlantic published in December, which found that at top schools like Brown and Harvard, more than 20% of undergrads are on the disabled list. And at Stanford, the number is a whopping 38%.
In her op-ed, Johnson describes her experience with registering as a disabled student at Stanford herself. As someone with endometriosis, which I can never really pronounce, she felt justified in claiming the condition as a legitimate disability because it can cause her extreme pain. But even then, she was surprised at how easy the process was. Quote, in addition to a single housing assignment, I was granted extra absences from class, some late days on assignments, and a 15-minute tardiness allowance for all of my classes. I was met with so little skepticism or questioning, I probably didn't even need a doctor's note to get these exemptions. Had I been pushier, I'm sure I could have received almost any accommodation I asked for.
On social media, many people blasted the students for seemingly taking advantage of the disability system. CEO and author Jennifer Say writes, "This is so pathetic. These kids at Stanford are liars and cheats. And of course, it's the most privileged kids at the most elite universities who are claiming disabilities just to get a leg up."
However, others argue that the fault lies more with the universities themselves rather than the students. Businessman Gagan Biani says on X, quote, coddling, let's call it what it is. Stanford shouldn't be saying yes to 40% of its students having disability accommodations. When you coddle our youth, ultimately they suffer the most. Sorry, Gen Z, we can and should do better. This is a very interesting story, Amber. You brought this to our attention, so tell me what you think.
Well, I think it is more so the university's fault, right? They're the ones who are supposed to be the adults in charge. They are supposed to be the ones trying to create an environment where people are pushed and challenged and ultimately can succeed and prepare them for when they ultimately graduate and go out and get jobs and start living in the real world, so to speak. If you're a student and you watch all of your classmates getting all of these advantages for something as simple as gluten intolerance, or in one case she said someone was able to get a single dorm room because they wear contact lenses,
right,
then I think they're right that you would be stupid not to take advantage because these schools are very highly competitive. A lot of the grades are done on a curve system. And if you're the lone person who's not claiming the disability, right, that would be silly to not take advantage of it. But yes, I think the university officials are at fault here. Now, I do feel for this young lady because I think she's done the right thing in exposing this and writing about her experience. But I know her classmates right now are looking at her like the girl who reminded the teacher about the homework.
She's the snitch.
It'll be her fault when Stanford revises their policies.
It will, and she'll get the blame for it. And she's obviously taking quite a lot of flack, which for an op-ed that seems quite she's simply describing her experiences and describing the dynamics behind those experiences, and that seems fine to me. This is one of those ones where we're pretty much on the same page. It's just, I think, a basic thing in human behavior that once you start seeing a lot of people gaming the system and standards or regulations that should be enforced not being enforced, then the incentive is just to join the people, bending the rules to their own advantage or gaming the system, obviously. And we see that in all kinds of areas in life. Very different example, but for example, I use the metro here in DC a lot. People often get away with evading fares, jumping the gates essentially, and there's very rarely action taken against that. The problem I have with that is that it transmits to other people, particularly other young people who would pay the fare, that they're kind of being fools to pay the fare and just not avoiding it, right?
Niall, are we going to get you to subscribe to broken windows policing theory today?
Well, let's not go too far, Amber. Let's one bridge at a time. But actually, I mean, there are actually things. This is a very side issue. One thing that I'm small c conservative about is I think in high school there should be school uniform. I don't think.
I'm pro uniform too.
Yeah. So there we go. You see, we do have some common ground. But on this point about the system, it is the failure to enforce reasonable scrutiny on the claim of disability, because obviously people who are suffering from a serious disability, which I think we all know what we mean by that, there should be accommodation made for them. Gluten intolerance. I mean, not to sound like the old grumpy guy about this, but like, gluten intolerance, in my view, is not a disability. And, there's no accommodation required in that respect.
And I said earlier that this is not preparing them well for the real world, but actually I should take that back, because in the real world, there is now a lot of the same type of behavior taking place with failure to enforce rules. I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of the so-called service animals that people have.
Right. That's another one. Right. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, bringing these little purse dogs on plane, and it's their service animal because it brings them comfort or something. It's absurd.
Right.
But this is where we've gotten, right? Like, people have looked at certain advantages or accommodations that people get, and they try to push the boundaries, and it is on our political leaders, on school officials, who have allowed those lines to become super blurry and to just reject basic common sense when it comes to actually enforcing these policies.
Right. And the person who used the term coddling there, I do think that's part of it. I mean, I think that society has changed in a whole lot of ways, and one of them is that people feel much more comfortable voicing their discomfort or inner feelings about various things, and I think that can be healthy to a degree. But stoicism and getting on with things has its place too, and we don't.
Spoken like a true Irishman.
Well, yeah, none of those feelings. You just get on with things and just plow ahead with it. And just on the point about people gaming the system, there was in the young woman's op-ed also a comment about how at Stanford, meal plans that you're compelled to pay for, they cost something like I don't know if it's per semester, per $7,000 or something. But if you claim certain religious exemptions, you can avoid that. And the Jain religion, which is, I think, predominantly Eastern and I think of Indian origin, where it holds that you can't consume anything that causes any damage to a living being. And so there's been upshot of Jainists at Stanford to avoid those costs.
I'll end this on a somewhat spicy political note, which is I do think there's some wokeness happening here.
Oh.
We're
going to disagree at the final moment, Amber.
I know, but I'll explain why. There's I think this more common trend over the past 5-10 years where you're not allowed to really question people who claim they have disabilities, and then there's the idea of like invisible disabilities. And so I do think that general attitude that if somebody says they have something wrong with them, you can't question it, that does create the permission structure for a system like this where, someone raises their hand and says, well, I'm disabled.
Yeah.
They're like, well, okay, that's fine.
Right.
We don't want to cause you offense by saying you don't look disabled, etc.
Yeah, whereas there are actually objective truths and objective facts,
sure.
especially in medicine. Next on Rising, the 2026 Winter Olympics opening ceremony will take place tonight, and the US is feeling the pressure of its current political tensions. We'll be right back with that after this.